All right, so this one I think is number 4 in the series. So yeah, I was going to play a little more of this clip just to refresh the memories of what this is all about and how it all relates to this situation we're in right now. I think we finished on speaking about a little bit about the head of state, and so we might go into that in a little more detail. Hopefully we'll even cover the police in this one. All right, just a bit more of this and then we'll get into some more definitions.
That's fine, and I'm still asking you to go home, please. Yeah, get your paycheck so you and your wife can eat. We won't, but you can eat. So we're not going home. I know. Hey, we're not going home. We're not listening to your orders anymore.
All right, let's get into what I was going to share next. Can government make law? No, government is a fiction that does not exist in nature. So to understand law, one needs to exist in nature. So the people who form government, yes, they exist in nature. However, they're not there as a function of existing in nature. They're there as an administrative body to administer the will of the people. So that is not their prescribed role to interpret natural law. That's not what they're there for, right? So it was created as an administrative body, therefore cannot interpret natural law to create law. Government only has the authority to deal with that which is temporary, which is legislation. And the previous one I did cover government and legislation and what legislation is. So hopefully watch that to understand this slide. So if we go back into our little hierarchy there of what the rule of law is and what it looks like. So just want to move that out of the way for a moment. Yeah, so that's the legislature, right? So that's their role and function. So what we might do is we might skip the judiciary for now, because I reckon it'll be better if I get into that later. So we might go into the executive, which is the, actually no, what I'll do is I'll just give some definitions to what a statist is and just where people's consciousness is at the moment. So this is what a slave thinks, right? This is where the majority of people's consciousness is right now. And most people without realizing it are statists. You'll see them, all the ones who are wearing the masks and the QR coding, they're following all these directives that believe this is, that's what a good person does. This was a view they hold without realizing they are. One who holds the erroneous belief that there is such a thing as authority vested in certain people, magically giving them the right to rule over other people. This authority means that a certain collective of people who we call government have the moral right to issue commands to those whom they rule, those under their jurisdiction, and that their subjects or slaves have a moral obligation to obey the arbitrary dictates, laws set by their masters. Simply put, a statist believes in the legitimacy of slavery. Now you think about all these arbitrary things that have been popping up about all to do with lockdown and all the restrictions and how they keep changing. I mean, it's right there in your face, right? So without realizing it, the majority of the population can be defined as statists. So we can show you just how far from sovereignty the majority or the collective conscience is. So now I really like this next one about what a statist is, because it just explains exactly what government is, not what we created it to be, but what it is now and has been for hundreds of years, if not thousands. So the brilliant idea, we give a small group of people the right to abduct, imprison, harass, dispossess, and kill people, so we can be protected from people who abduct, harass, dispossess, and kill people. I love that. That says everything, right? That shows you what happens when you live in fear, what you acquiesce and what you allow, what you give permission to, right? So we wouldn't have never allowed ourselves to get into this version of government if there wasn't fear first. All right, so that's why I love that one. That one really explains it really well. So now we're going to jump into the executive branch. So just showing that slide again. So here it is here, the police and the prisons. So that's called the executive because they execute what other parts of the government arms, decide on. So let's look into what a police constable is, shall we? Okay, so here's a definition of what a police constable is. A man or woman acting in the role of independent holder of the office of constable must take an oath to serve and protect the sovereignty. Remember, I did go back into that really clearly, I think in the second one, of the people by upholding the law, not the legislation, not the legal system. That's got nothing to do with law. Those two are mind control constructs, which you can see I've pretty much showed you with legislation, and the legal system is the same. They're all contract driven. That's all to do with a fictional invention in the mind of how to control people. That gives the illusion of authority and the illusion of jurisdiction. That's a thing, right? And you can see, if you watch the legal system, if you really pay attention, you can see how it's there to conceal crime, not to actually prevent it. But you really need to have your eyes open to see how it's done. So by upholding the law of the land, which is our law of the land is the common law, right? So the common law is do no harm, create no loss, commit no fraud, and keep the peace, right? So that is what a law officer is. An office holder of the law is someone who just upholds that, nothing else. All these other things that have been placed on them, it even says it in the Victoria Police Act, right? They've got other duties placed on them that are subordinate to common law, right? So that should never have happened if we're having a proper system of governance. But that's where we are now. In order to have legitimate authority that only the people grant. So because authority is a fiction, it's invented, only people can grant it. And so they can grant it on the conditions that they set, right? And so that is the conditions they've set right there. And you go back to the behavior of those people in those uniforms and those costumes where they're heavily armed, that are carrying weapons that can actually take life, right? You think about how serious that is to hold that weapon, right? And the only reason they were given that weapon was to protect the people's sovereignty by upholding the actual law, not the legal, not the legislation, but that's what the grant was given, to do that, right? Because sometimes you might need to use deadly force to do it. So that is what was granted. Now you have a look at what they're actually doing, right? And what they're being paid to do. So even that, you watch him and he says it in his consciousness, he goes, he doesn't want to be here doing this, but he has to. Even in his language, I have to, like he doesn't have a choice. So they're teaching them, they've got themselves believing they don't have a choice, that they're absent of choice here, and it's their life. Like somehow their life is separate to everyone else's. There's a separation. So here, in my life, this is what I can do right now. Like there's nothing else I can do other than be an enforcer of slavery. That's how I can survive. Like you think about how far bent that is from reality, right? How someone comes to accept that. Is that a man who's speaking because he understands that he's sovereign? Or is that a man who's speaking because he believes he's a slave? Like, it's pretty much telling you right there where he's at. So now I'm going to bring up the dictionary's definition of what a police constable is. Because that's all that they are. Regardless of what their title is, they're all constables, even the police commissioner. A constable has independent authority to exercise his or her office. Remember, they're office holder of constable. A constable cannot be directed by government or senior police as to who he or she should prosecute. We don't see much of that, do we? Right? So they're all saying, "Oh, I'm doing my job. I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what I'm told." Like, they've got to follow orders. So already in breach of their actual oath. A constable's duty to enforce the law, not the legal, not legislation, is a personal responsibility. That's really big, that personal responsibility. So they have personal responsibility upon their actions. So if they ever come stand in front of the people, they're not going to be able to say, "I was just doing my job," and that the people are going to say, "Oh, no worries. Now that you're doing the job, just forget about it and you go home." Because it's even there stated, as to what the grant of authority, on what conditions it's come from, as to how they get the authority by the people. And the constable is answerable only to law, right? So what the law, 4 tenets of law: create no loss, commit no harm, or do no harm, keep the peace, and commit no fraud. Like, I don't know about you guys, but all I see is all 4 of those are breached with that video that I've been showing you. So they're not there to follow his or her senior officer's directions. They are not bound to do that, right? So that means that they're doing it by choice. That means it's a conscious choice to do that, right? So they're so not even protected in any way, shape, or form for the performance of that duty, right? So that is what an actual police constable is. Now, do you honestly believe that these police constables are taught that? You know, if they were teaching them that, they'd be functioning entirely differently. You know, it wouldn't even be close to what they're doing now. But obviously, they go out of their way to teach them the legal system is the law, you know. And these guys, they don't want to actually use their conscience. So there's a particular kind of individual that is drawn to want to be a police constable, you know, and that's, my guess is someone who will act out of conscience, you know, that they don't have that real integrity in their conscience. Now, what do I want to share? I want to share this. We're going to go back to that original slide. So as you can see, we've gone from natural law to what the rule of law is, to the people, to the artificial organization that's created to serve man, and officers that have taken oaths. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because I'm going to just get some other slides ready.